Story 1. The Legend of the Shadow Man. The forest was dense and mysterious, a place where sunlight barely penetrated through the canopy of trees. The scout camp was situated right in the middle of this labyrinth of trunks and leaves, a place chosen for its beauty and isolation. For the young scouts, it was an opportunity to learn about nature and develop survival skills. For Lucas, it was another thrilling adventure, full of promises of new experiences. The group of scouts arrived at the camp in the early afternoon, setting up their tents on a flat area surrounded by towering trees. Carlos, the experienced leader of the group, directed the activities efficiently and patiently, ensuring that everyone knew what to do. "Lucas, you and Peter set up the tent here," Carlos said, pointing to an open space. "Anna, you can help Julia with the campfire." Lucas, a 14-year-old boy with an adventurous spirit, nodded excitedly and started working with Peter, his best friend. As they set up the tent, Lucas couldn't help but notice the strange silence of the forest. There were no bird songs or the rustling of small animals. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. "Do you think the stories about this place are true?" Peter asked as he struggled to drive a stake into the ground. "What stories?" Lucas asked, feigning disinterest but clearly curious. "You know, about the Shadow Man." Peter replied, lowering his voice. "They say he appears at night and takes anyone who ventures alone into the forest." Lucas laughed, but the truth was, he felt a slight chill. "Oh, it's just a legend. Carlos probably made it up to keep us close to the camp." That night, after a simple dinner of hot dogs and marshmallows roasted over the campfire, Carlos gathered everyone around the flames to tell stories. It was a tradition all the scouts loved, a moment to hear tales of bravery, survival, and of course, scary legends. Carlos stood up, looking at the young faces illuminated by the firelight. "Tonight, I'm going to tell you a legend that many around here know, the legend of the Shadow Man." Silence fell over the group. Everyone was attentive, some more curious, others visibly nervous. "They say that many years ago, a man lived alone in this forest," Carlos began. "He was a hunter and knew every inch of this place, but one day, he disappeared. Some say he got lost, others that he was taken by something he shouldn't have encountered." The flames of the campfire crackled, casting dancing shadows around the group. Carlos continued, his voice low and mysterious. "Since then, those who venture too far into the forest say they see a figure in the shadows. A man, or something that looks like a man, watching them. And if someone sees him, he starts following that person until, well, no one knows for sure what happens next." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. He loved horror stories, but this one felt more real than he wanted to admit. He looked around and saw he wasn't the only one affected by the story. Peter was pale, and Anna was staring into the flames, biting her lower lip. "Now it's just a story," Carlos said, trying to ease the tension. "But remember, don't wander too far from the camp at night. The forest can be a dangerous place." After the fire was extinguished and everyone went to their tents, Lucas lay in his sleeping bag, trying to push the image of the Shadow Man out of his mind. But curiosity was stronger. He wanted to know if there was any truth to the legend. "Hey, Peter," he whispered, turning to his friend beside him. "What?" Peter replied, clearly unable to sleep. "Let's take a walk through the forest, just to see if we find anything." Peter hesitated. "You heard Carlos? We shouldn't wander off at night." "Oh, come on," Lucas insisted. "Just a quick walk. We're together, there's no danger." Reluctantly, Peter agreed. The two silently slipped out of the tent, making sure no one saw them. The night was cold and dark, and the moonlight barely penetrated through the tree canopy. With their flashlights in hand, they began walking through the forest. At first, everything seemed normal. The ground was covered with dry leaves that crunched under their feet, and the air was filled with the smell of damp earth and wood. But as they ventured deeper into the forest, the feeling of unease grew. "It's getting darker," Peter whispered, looking around nervously. "Relax, we're together," Lucas replied, trying to sound confident. "Look, there's a clearing up ahead." They reached the clearing and turned off their flashlights to look around. The moon faintly illuminated the open space, revealing tall, ancient trees. It was a beautiful place, but there was something disturbing in the air. Suddenly, Lucas felt as if he were being watched. He turned quickly and saw a shadow moving among the trees. "Peter, did you see that?" he whispered, his heart pounding. "I saw it," Peter replied, his voice trembling. "Let's go back." But before they could move, the shadow approached. It was a tall, indistinct figure that seemed to float above the ground. Its eyes were pits of darkness without any sign of life. "Run," the figure whispered, in a voice that seemed to come from all directions. Lucas and Peter started running, fear giving them a speed they never knew they had. The shadows seemed to follow their every move, and the forest became a maze of trees and branches trying to prevent their escape. Finally, they saw the camp's lights in the distance. With renewed strength, they pushed themselves and ran until they were back in the circle of tents. They collapsed on the ground, panting and terrified. Carlos appeared, clearly awakened by the noise. "What happened?" he asked, helping them up. We saw the Shadow Man," Lucas said, still trying to catch his breath. "He followed us." Carlos looked at them seriously. "I told you not to wander off. The forest can be dangerous at night. Come, let's go to the campfire." They rekindled the fire and sat around the flames, the feeling of safety slowly returning. Lucas and Peter recounted everything they had seen, while Carlos and the other scouts listened attentively. "It's possible that the Shadow Man is just a legend," Carlos said calmly. "But legends usually have a kernel of truth. What's important is that you're safe, and maybe now you understand better why some stories should be respected." Lucas nodded, feeling a new understanding of the power of legends and the mysteries of nature. "Yes, I understand, and I promise not to wander off again." The scouts spent the rest of the night around the campfire, telling lighter stories and laughing together. The fear slowly dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and learning. Story 2. The Spirit of the Lake. The sun was setting, and the lake's waters reflected the day's last rays of light, creating a spectacle of warm and tranquil colors. Anna, a brave and determined scout, was excited to spend the night by the lake with her group. The tranquility of the place was a welcome contrast to the frenzy of urban life. The group of scouts, led by John, had set up camp near the lake's shore, surrounded by towering mountains and lush trees. John was known for his scary stories, and the scouts were eager to hear another of his tales that night. After a day full of outdoor activities, the group gathered around the campfire for dinner. Marshmallows were roasted, and songs were sung, the fire's warmth keeping them comfortably warm against the growing cold of the night. "Come on, John, tell us a scary story," one of the scouts pleaded, his voice full of anticipation. John smiled and nodded, standing up slowly. "Very well, I have the perfect story for tonight. It's about this lake and the legend that surrounds it." The scouts huddled closer to the fire, their eyes shining with curiosity. John looked at the lake, now enveloped in almost total darkness, with only the moon casting a silvery glow on the surface. "They say that many years ago, a young woman named Clara lived near this lake," John began. "She was known for her beauty and kindness, but one day, she mysteriously disappeared. It is believed that she drowned in the lake's waters, and since then, her spirit haunts this place." The scouts exchanged glances, some visibly nervous, while others appeared skeptical. Anna, in particular, was intrigued, but also skeptical. "On nights of a full moon, like tonight," John continued, "they say you can see Clara's figure in the water, looking for someone to help her find peace. Those brave enough to swim in the lake at night might feel her presence." Determined to prove the legend was just a story to scare children, Anna decided she would swim in the lake that night. "That's just a story to scare us. I'll swim in the lake to prove there's nothing supernatural here." The other scouts looked at her with admiration and concern. "Are you sure, Anna?" John asked, seriously. "I don't want anyone taking unnecessary risks." Anna nodded, her determination unwavering. "I'm sure. I don't believe in these legends, and I'll prove there's nothing to fear." John sighed, but allowed her to go as long as she took all necessary safety precautions. Anna prepared herself, putting on her swimsuit and grabbing a flashlight to light the way to the lake's shore. The other scouts followed her to the water's edge, keeping a safe distance but curious to see what would happen. The full moon illuminated the lake's surface, creating a scene both beautiful and mysterious. "Good luck, Anna," John said, holding the flashlight. "We'll be here if you need help." Anna smiled and entered the water, which was cold and calm. She swam slowly, feeling the water envelop her body like a cold mantle. Everything seemed peaceful, and for a moment, she thought she was right. There was nothing scary about the lake. But then, when she was in the middle of the lake, something changed. The water temperature dropped abruptly, and Anna felt a chill run down her spine. The silence around her was oppressive, and the only thing she could hear was the sound of her own heavy breathing. Suddenly, she felt something touch her foot. She looked down, but the darkness of the water prevented her from seeing anything. She tried to ignore the growing fear and keep swimming, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. "There's nothing here," she murmured to herself, trying to calm down. "It's just my imagination." But then, she saw a submerged figure in the water, an indistinct shadow slowly moving towards her. Panic took over Anna, and she began to swim back to the shore as fast as she could. The figure followed her, its shapes becoming increasingly clear. Finally, she reached the shore and got out of the water, panting and trembling. The other scouts ran to her, helping her cover up with a towel. "What happened, Anna?" John asked, concerned. I saw something in the water," she replied, still trying to catch her breath. "It was a figure, like a person." John frowned. "Are you sure?" Anna nodded. "Yes, I'm sure, and it felt like it was pulling me down." The scouts were silent, fear evident on their faces. "Maybe the legend is true," one of them whispered. John looked at the lake, reflecting on what Anna had said. "It could be, but what's important is that everyone is safe. Let's go back to camp." Back at the camp, Anna warmed up around the fire while the other scouts tried to process what had happened. The atmosphere was tense, and everyone seemed closer, united by the shared fear. John decided it was time to speak. Stories like these often have a kernel of truth. Maybe Clara is really trapped in this lake, looking for help, but we shouldn't expose ourselves to unnecessary danger. The scouts nodded, understanding the message. The night continued more calmly, with low conversations and a renewed sense of respect for nature and its mysteries. Anna, despite the fear she felt, was grateful for the experience. She had learned that some stories, no matter how fantastic they seem, might have roots in reality, and that respecting these stories and the places we inhabit is fundamental. "Thank you, John," Anna said, looking at the scout leader. "I learned an important lesson today." John smiled and nodded. "We're here to learn from each other and from nature. And you were brave, Anna. But always remember that prudence is as important as courage." As the night progressed, the scouts retired to their tents, still thinking about the lake's legend and Clara's spirit. The full moon shone over the camp, and tranquility seemed to return to the place. In the following days, the scout group continued their activities, but with a new reverence for the lake and its stories. Anna, especially, felt a deeper connection to the place and a greater understanding of what it means to be a guardian of nature. Story 3. The Woodsman's Cabin. The camp was bustling with activity, scouts running around, setting up their tents, and organizing their equipment. The setting was a dense, lush forest that seemed to embrace the young adventurers in its vastness. In the distance, a stream murmured softly, completing the perfect picture for an outdoor experience. Mark, a curious and adventurous scout, was especially excited for this camp. He always loved exploring and discovering new places, and he had heard that the camp was near an old woodsman's cabin, a place shrouded in mystery and legends. Helena, the group leader, knew the area well and had mentioned the cabin in some of her stories. "Set up the tents here, and once we're done, we'll go for a hike to explore the area," Helena said, guiding the scouts. She was a respected leader, known for her wisdom and ability to keep the group united and safe. While helping to set up the tents, Mark couldn't get the cabin out of his mind. "Do you think the woodsman's cabin is really haunted?" he asked John, a close friend and fellow camper. "Helena said the woodsman mysteriously disappeared," John replied, adjusting a stake. "Who knows, it might just be a story to scare us." Mark smiled, determined to find out the truth. "I'm going to check out the cabin tonight. Are you coming with me?" John hesitated, but curiosity was equally strong. "Sure, but we have to be careful. I don't want Helena to catch us." After setting up the tents and organizing the camp, Helena led the group on a hike through the forest, showing points of interest and explaining the local flora and fauna. She was an excellent guide, and the scouts absorbed every word. "Over there," Between those trees is the woodsman's cabin, Helena said, pointing to a denser area of the forest. They say he lived alone and one day just disappeared. Some believe his spirit still haunts the cabin, especially at night. Mark and John exchanged glances. It was exactly the kind of challenge they were hoping for. They decided to wait until everyone was asleep to explore the cabin. Night fell, and with it, the forest's silence. The scouts were tired after a full day of activities and soon retreated to their tents. Mark and John waited patiently until the camp was completely quiet. "Let's go," Mark whispered, getting up slowly and grabbing a flashlight. John did the same, and together, they quietly slipped out of the camp, making sure not to make any noise. The walk to the cabin was short, but every step felt loaded with anticipation. The shadows of the trees danced around them under the flashlight's beam, creating a tense and mysterious atmosphere. Finally, they saw the cabin, an old, partially collapsed structure surrounded by thick vegetation. "There it is," Mark said, pointing with the flashlight. "Let's see what we find." They approached the cabin cautiously, feeling the air grow colder and heavier. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Mark pushed the door open and entered, followed closely by John. The cabin's interior was dark and dusty. Old furniture was scattered around, and a fireplace occupied the center of the room. There was a strong smell of mold and aged wood. "Look at this," John said, pointing to an old axe leaning against the wall. It must have been used by the woodsman. Mark walked over to the fireplace and saw something shining on the floor. He bent down and picked up an old, dirt-covered locket. "This must have belonged to him," he said, showing the find to John. Suddenly, they felt an intense cold fill the cabin. The old floorboards creaked as if someone were walking on them. The boys looked at each other, their eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Mark whispered, feeling his heart race. "Yes," John replied, his voice trembling. "I think we should get out of here." Before they could move, an indistinct figure appeared by the fireplace. It was the woodsman's spirit, a skeletal form wrapped in shadows, with eyes glowing with a spectral light. He seemed to look directly at them, as if assessing their intentions. "What are you doing here?" the figure asked, its voice echoing through the cabin. Mark felt a lump in his throat but tried to respond. We just wanted to know more about you. We don't want to cause any trouble." The woodsman's spirit floated silently closer. "This cabin is my home. I was betrayed and abandoned here. My spirit cannot rest." John took a step back, fear evident on his face. "How can we help you?" The woodsman pointed to the fireplace. "There is a chest hidden behind these stones. It holds the key to my peace. Find it and take it to the stream. There, you will understand what must be done." Mark and John nodded, moving quickly to remove the stones from the fireplace. After a few minutes of effort, they found an old, soot-covered wooden chest. They opened it and found a rusty metal box. "Let's take this to the stream," Mark said, feeling the urgency in the spirit's voice. They quickly left the cabin, carrying the metal box, and walked towards the stream under the flashlight's beam. The sound of running water guided them, and soon they reached the shore. They set the box down and opened it. Inside, they found a diary and some old jewelry. The diary was filled with entries that told the woodsman's story. How he was betrayed by his partners and left to die in the forest, and how his spirit remained trapped there, waiting for justice. "We need to read this to everyone," John said, understanding the importance of the diary. This must be what he wanted. They returned to the camp, now with a new purpose. When they arrived, they found Helena still awake, looking worriedly into the forest. "Where were you?" she asked, visibly relieved to see them. "I was worried." "Helena, we need to show something to everyone," Mark said seriously. "We found the woodsman's diary. He wants everyone to know the truth." Helena nodded, gathering the scouts around the campfire. Mark and John read the diary aloud, telling the woodsman's story and his tragic death. As they read, they felt they were helping the lost soul find peace. When they finished, there was a respectful silence among the scouts. Everyone understood the gravity of what they had discovered. "We should hold a ceremony to honor his memory," Helena suggested. "Let's take him to the stream and leave these jewels as an offering." The next morning, the group of scouts headed to the stream. With respect and reverence, they placed the jewels in the water and said a few words in memory of the woodsman. They felt a calmness take over the place, as if the spirit could finally rest. Mark and John felt a weight lift from their shoulders. They knew they had done something important, something that went beyond their lives as scouts. They had helped a lost soul find peace.